People are coming to food banks because they don't have enough money.
Collectively end the need for food banks.
It's not going to be easy.
We will all have to work together.
No, this just isn't acceptable.
What's your role in that?
You need to start challenging the systemic structures.
It's something that we have to think about.
There's going to be things that just don't work, and maybe that's a bit of a cop-out. How can you not listen to the voices of people who have lived through that experience? You can't sort of say, well, this is how we'll do it, without really involving people that have been through that experience.
Welcome to the Hublife Podcast. I'm Steph and this is Phil.
And we're joined today by Jo Stevenson, who is our area manager, Trussell Trust area manager for the east of England?
No, for Norfolk and Suffolk.
Norfolk and Suffolk, that's changed like 3 or 4 times.
Yeah, just a bit.
I can't keep up.
Yeah.
Anyway, we've been doing a podcast, as you know, talking about the end in the need for Foodbank in the UK. And we've been trying to learn from lots of other people. And we just had, a couple of weeks ago, had a podcast with some area managers. But Jo oversees
project managers, not area managers.
Oh, sorry, project managers, yeah, sorry. But Jo oversees loads of food banks. How many food banks in?
Well, only 11.
Only 11?
Only 11. So 8 in Norfolk and 3 in Suffolk, although Waveney straddles Norfolk and Suffolk. So, yeah, 11 in total.
Yeah, and that's food banks that then have multiple distribution centres as well.
Yes.
So it's many distribution centres across all of them,
That's
isn't
right.
it? Yeah. And so we thought we'd get a valuable perspective of your view of, because you sort of dip into all of them food banks. And
what we want to know, Jo, is are we the best?
Yes, we are the best. That's what
Always, Steph.
A plus.
A triple plus, actually. Yeah.
But as a food bank area manager, then overseeing multiple food banks in the region, if you can share, because we're trying to learn and glean as many ideas as possible to try and implement or pilot in the future. Have you got any projects that have worked well, or some that have just started that look like that could work in individual food banks across them 11, or even any that you know from other area managers that you talk to as well? So if you've got any advice or any ideas that are working well?
Yeah, I mean, there's lots of exciting stuff happening. I mean, I feel so privileged in terms of my job, and it's just so fantastic to support you as a food bank. And I would say that what you are doing is really innovative in terms of the podcast and just starting to explore and get people's different views around, how do we end the need for food banks? Because that's quite a massive thing. But a big thing that's happening across Norfolk and Suffolk is financial inclusion. So supporting people to maximise their income, because at the end of the day, we know that people are coming to food banks because they don't have enough money. Yeah. So people will sometimes talk about food poverty, about fuel poverty, about period poverty. It's actually poverty and people not having enough money in their pockets. So a big part of the strategy is financial inclusion. And I think it's 9 out of 11 of those food banks are doing some sort of financial inclusion work, including yourselves. So Norwich Food Bank, for example, they are partnering with 3 organisations. So they have a shelter worker, more recently a British Red Cross worker, and a CA advisor at their centres. And the idea behind that is they can provide multi-agency support so that when someone comes in for their food parcel, those agencies can address the things that are driving that person to come. The idea being that they don't have to sort of go somewhere else and tell their story a number of times. They can, at that point of crisis, they can come talk to someone who can support them in a whole range of areas.
Hannah had mentioned about the Red Cross, the new project that's happening alongside the CA worker. I thought it was a brilliant idea because it's sort of passing out the difference between maybe some of the financial stuff and maybe some of the other social stuff, rather than the CA worker having to take on all of that role and maybe taking some of the energy away from dealing with the financial problems by a financial specialist. So I thought that's a really, really good idea going forward.
Yeah. I think I don't know too much about the role of the British Red Cross worker, but I think it's befriending and advocacy, and actually the Hunger in the UK research that's just been released. A big issue for people coming to food banks is social isolation and loneliness, and actually sometimes people need support to engage with services and take those next steps. So to have someone walking alongside them is really valuable. But a lot of food banks are doing some sort of financial inclusion work. Yarmouth and Magdalen Food Bank are partnering with Dial, just because that's the more appropriate advice service in Yarmouth. And they also have a community link worker. I'm going to get that wrong, but I can't remember the exact name, but community link worker who does quite enhanced signposting when people come in. So she does the triage work and then she can refer them into the dial worker who does the advice. But yeah, I mean, there's other things happening. So this is just sort of a small example, but King's Lynn Foodbank, Helen, the project manager there, has done some really good work in terms of linking up with her borough council. She may have talked to you about that.
She just mentioned it, yeah.
Oh, so I won't go into... She
only mentioned it, so she didn't really go into detail. Basically she shared her ward level data with the borough council, who then compared it to their deprivation figures that they'd got for the different wards. And there was a discrepancy. So the wards that the borough council felt were quite deprived weren't featuring as wards who were accessing the food bank. And it happened that those wards were largely in rural areas. And obviously food banks in rural areas face completely different challenges to those in more urban areas. But the fantastic thing that happened was that the King's Lynn Borough Council, they had some cost of living roadshows planned, and they changed the locations of those roadshows to go into the more rural areas where people there was quite high levels of deprivation, but they weren't accessing the food bank. So, that's quite small, but to me, that's a win, sharing data, working collaboratively with your local council, and, then putting in place support, where it's needed. Yes, that's two examples. Haverhill are doing fantastic stuff in terms of influencing. So to end the need for food banks, you need to start challenging the systemic structures that are driving people to food banks. So they have the amazing Saffron, who's their local influencer, and we funded... That sounds like a magician.
Well, no, but we had a cluster meeting recently and we just coined the phrase, we want a saffron. We want a saffron, Jo. Saffron's amazing. So she's employed by grant funding from the Trussell Trust, but it's just enabled Haverhill to do some work with the people in Haverhill, people who are facing financial hardship, and just exploring what are the drivers to food bank, what needs to happen. So they're doing fantastic work, sort of doing influencing and campaigning in their local community.
Can I clarify that influencing and campaigning then is not online but in person again? So Helen was saying her influence and stuff is all in-person stuff, nothing to do with online influencing, or is it both in their case,
I think it's more in person. So Saffron has good links with Suffolk County Councils. She co-chairs, I can't remember the exact title, but Anti-Poverty Working Group for Suffolk County Council. She did some influencing around the local welfare scheme and encouraging the council to continue supporting people with £15 vouchers, I think it was, during school holidays, because they saw a drop in food bank use. So Suffolk County Council, it might not have been just entirely down to Haverhill. There were other organisations involved. Very much in person. So
lots of different food banks doing lots of different work then. So, and all of them sort of look like they're centred around the new vision of Trussell. And so in that regard then, to what extent do you think the food banks have got on board with the vision? And did that take a little time for some and others or individuals within? Because every food bank is independent, everyone should know at home.
Yeah.
And so even though we're a network, they're completely independent food banks and have a different charity structure as well. Some are completely independent, some are linked or umbrella underneath a church that has a wider remit rather than the food bank. And so what have you witnessed across your region, at least, of how different food banks have navigated that change of vision? Because it could feel like a big change of vision, even though I actually don't think it's that big a change of vision. No. But the language around it definitely is. So how have you found it generally?
So, because actually Trussell, we used to have a strapline, a food bank in every town, and that's obviously completely changed. So with we've just seen this continual increase in rise in terms of people needing food banks. So it got to a point where really, this just isn't acceptable. And I don't think there's any food bank that wants to be doing what they're doing. They want people to have the dignity to be able to buy food like everyone else. But yeah, I think, but also just to clarify that it is sort of Trussell's vision and strategy, but it was very much owned by the network. So we did, in the period where we were putting together the strategy and vision, we did very much get the voices and views of food banks. So we had this it was called Network for Change, and there were various ways that food banks could engage and say what needed to happen. So I think 77% of food banks in the network had some engagement in that. So actually the vision and strategy, it's Trussell's, but actually it's the food bank networks, vision and strategy. So all the food banks they re-signed the new franchise agreement, saying they were aligned with ending the need for themselves. I think some have sort of dived in more quickly than others, but that's, I think
that's normal with everything that's offered within Trussell, isn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And sometimes it takes time to sort of hear what other food banks are doing and then to be encouraged. It can also be down to capacity and just not although we've got grants to support with that. And at the end of the day, I don't want to be forcing food banks to do something. It needs to come from, the food banks need to be ready. But, all the food banks, I would say, are aligned and they're all doing something, as I say, 9 out of 11 are doing financial inclusion projects. They've taken up the grants that we provided, which is absolutely fantastic. So, yeah, but every food bank is different. So I think, and their journey will be different, and how they sort of move forward with the strategy will be very much bespoke to their local community. So, how Yarmouth and Magdalen Food Bank might approach the strategy and ending the need for themselves will look very different to your strategy, because Thetford is different to Yarmouth. You have different challenges. There will be some commonalities. So, yeah.
Yeah, you say every food bank's got a different journey with that. So what about your journey with that? Because obviously you were around before, when it was a food bank in every town. So I think even independently, every food bank manager or trustee or even volunteer or coordinator, but everyone within the Trussell must have gone through their own individual journey of sort of not turning around, but just changing their mind, like we're trying to do with other people, but in our own mind. So how quick did that happen with you, or was it something you were ahead of, if you know what I mean, or was it something that you hadn't thought of until the vision was articulated or the idea was articulated?
I think I'm flexible. I do as I'm told, Phil, basically.
You're an employee.
In all seriousness, I just feel so privileged to work for the Trussell Trust. And this vision it's a big vision. It's challenging. It's not going to be easy, but you have to have hope in this situation, don't you? And you have to set yourself an ambitious vision. So I am fully on board. Just giving out one food parcel is one food parcel too many. I just feel completely on board that everyone should have the dignity. Everyone should have enough money in their pockets to have the dignity to be able to go out and buy food and not to go short. So I'm fully on board. So I think I don't really remember there being a transition. I think
it felt organic and just natural.
Yeah.
That's cool. So each food bank is an independent organisation, and so you are an area manager of 11 independent food banks. And in the past, maybe would have just worked with them independently, like area managers would have done, and would have been very little in terms of cross collaboration and pollination of ideas and stuff. But that's been, I think, very different over the last few years, more and more. We've had a podcast with 2 other managers, but we have cluster meetings with other people. But what role do you play in that sort of collaboration between food banks, let alone other partnerships, but across food banks as well, in fostering that shared vision? Because it is a shared vision across a network. And so to ultimately, I suppose, collectively end the need for food bank, I think we will all have to do work together, even though we're all independent. So what's your role in that? Maybe you can share with the people at home how you do that.
So I suppose I see myself as a facilitator, really, and sort of linking people in and joining the dots. So because I have a relationship with those different food banks and talk to other area managers, so that I do have a sense of, to some extent, of what's going on elsewhere in the network and what other food banks are doing. So, if, say, a food bank is keen to start collecting stories of people coming to food bank and using those for influencing, I can say, oh, well, I think you ought to talk to
Hannah in Norwich.
or Harlow Foodbank are doing an amazing job with that. Because actually, why reinvent the wheel? It's so important to learn from what others are doing and to be inspired. And, let's face it, there's going to be, in terms of the different things food banks might try, there's going to be things that just don't work. Yeah. Doesn't matter. Learn from it. Okay, that doesn't work. Why not? What can we do differently? What needs to happen? So I just think I'm a massive, massive supporter of sharing good practice and sharing knowledge. So we obviously have the food bank cluster meetings once a month. We've just had one around local influencing. Saffron came to that. Hence, we coined the phrase, we want a saffron. That really inspired food banks to think about, perhaps we could do more influencing. And, that was great to hear about the Day of Action that Norwich Food Bank did and hear what Helen at King's Lynn's doing in terms of working with the Borough Council and contacting all the newly elected councillors. So I think once food banks hear what other food banks are doing, I think it just inspires, motivates and enables food banks to see, we could do that as well.
I think part of it, just like, not that we're lazy, but like even joining the Trussell Trust network, it was like there's already an established way of doing something that we can do with this amount of energy and resource. Where if you were inventing it from scratch, it'd be like you just wouldn't bother because there's too much energy and resource to go into it. So to see other food banks or Pathfinder food banks that are doing things that you can then, I've said it like 3 or 4 times on the podcast, I'm going to steal your ideas.
Yeah.
And that's and I'm not shy. Only the ones that work.
Well, people might share your ideas as well about your podcast. But just going back to Pathfinder food banks, actually. Pathfinder food banks, I can't remember how many of them there are in the network actually, but Norwich, Haverhill are Pathfinders in our region. And it's not to differentiate them from other food banks because, lots of food banks are doing amazing stuff. Pathfinders are just going on a specific journey to really pilot and trial things. They meet to share their learning. But the idea then is that things that have worked will then get shared wider in the network. So actually the regional forum that's happening in Cambridge is going to be around referral agencies and referral pathways and resources that have been created through the Pathfinder programme and learnings around how to engage with referral agencies, how to support people further upstream so they don't need to come to food banks will be shared there. So there is we're all on a learning journey and failing is still learning,
Yeah.
No, we agree. We talked about it in the last podcast, didn't we? That, I think Trussell have been really good with that of funding and resourcing and almost taking the hit on the financial stuff to pioneer and have generic sort of generative thinking about what we can do going forward, where an independent small charity might think that's too much of a risk to try and to trial that to possibly fail. So I think it's been brilliant from Trussell to equip people to do that. Yeah. It's been great. And saying that, like going forward in the next year or so, there are a few things that we want to try and do. We might have spoke to you before about it, but in the next few months, we want to really be looking to engage folks with lived experience in the food bank and the strategic plan going forward. And so, and even in our media and telling stories through that as well, or even if possible, having people with lived experience on the podcast to chat to as well. And so with that in mind, how important do you think that is in finding solutions? Because it is quite big in the charity sector, well, in every area at the minute of people with lived experience. But how important do you think it is in finding solutions as opposed to top-down prescriptive things? Yeah. And to what extent have you seen other food banks do it? Because like we would talk to Hannah at Norwich, and she is finding it quite difficult to do, and there's lots and lots of hurdles to it as well. And so, have you got any food banks that are doing it well, or are they all on the same sort of area of us of just treading lightly in that area at the minute?
So we call it participation, and it's a key approach in terms of our strategy. It should be a thread that runs through everything that food banks do. So involving people with lived experience of financial hardship. So there's a phrase, nothing about us without us is for us. And, if you're going to, how can you not listen to the voices of people who have lived through that experience, because they have such valuable knowledge that, they have such insight and expertise and wisdom in terms of solutions. You can't sort of say, this is how we'll do it, and this will be a really good idea, without really involving people that have been through that experience or are experiencing it, because they know. So I just think it's absolutely crucial, but it's hard. So there's something called the ladder of participation. So the bottom rung would be like consultation. So maybe doing a survey or something, and maybe not doing anything with that survey. But so you have to start small, doing a survey, finding out what people like about the food bank, what could be done differently. That's if you are then going to act on, what people are saying, that's just tiny steps to start. At the top of the ladder, you've maybe got something like a steering group of people with lived experience who are very much empowered to shape solutions, co-produce solutions, and really have that power. But I think to get to that point, you need capacity. So just thinking of Haverhill, they have saffron. We should call this podcast Saffron, shouldn't we?
Magic
to make sure Saffron's not listening to this. But no, so they have saffron, and actually she's done a lot of work with people with lived experience. So as part of the local influencing programme, they have to identify a campaign, and it's like a local issue. So that involved talking to a lot of people in Haverhill, talking to people with lived experience, and they decided on a mental health campaign, because that was seen as a real issue in Haverhill in terms of just lack of crisis provision. And we know that 75% of people coming to food banks either have a disability themselves, or at least one person in their household has a disability. So there is a real sort of link between food bank use, disability, particularly mental health as well. So that's a real example of a food bank that has really engaged with the local community, listened to people, but that's taken time. Yeah. That's taken a lot of hours to do. So, we're sort of supporting food banks who would like to do that. So thinking about, particularly with the financial inclusion work, maybe sort of people who've accessed that service at the food bank, finding out what could be improved, what could be done differently, just as a sort of, a starting point. Because I think to go straight to the top of the ladder would be quite difficult to do.
I think even going through the ranks, like you said, of the stages of that, it is so difficult to do it well. And you know me, Jo, I don't like to do anything unless we're going to do it well. And I would never want to do anything to tick a box, because we're including it, we're doing it, and it's got to add value and have and add to, have solutions, even if it fails. Like I wouldn't want to do it just to tick a box. And so, like, I suppose it's really to do, I don't know, maybe I overthink these things, but it must be very difficult to get a true representation of people with lived experience, because the people who would be involved in that sort of stuff are a very specific type of person who would come forward. And like to whether you get a couple of very vocal people that drive the agenda and not have a balanced view, and I'm not saying that that's happened, but like it's something that we have to think about when we're doing this sort of stuff. And I'd rather learn from people who've gone through it beforehand, like you said, collaborating across food banks and seeing what doesn't work, because we just won't even try that. And so it's something we want to do, but we really want to do it well.
Right.
Yeah. And I think, it's sort of early days. And again, I think there'll be lots of learning shared, but we have a participation team at Trussell, sort of, Norfolk specific. There's Your Own Place, who I know you've sort of had tentative conversations with. So there is support out there, but certainly within Trussell, we have a participation toolkit. So there is support internally to support food banks with it, because it is something, well, I say it's new. Actually, it's not really, because this is what you are amazing at food, as food banks, and that's engaging and talking to people who are coming through your doors, and listening to them, and really valuing them. So actually, it's not it's not something completely new.
Yeah. And I suppose for every food bank, it will feel different as well on how valuable it is, because we're in a very working class area, quite a deprived area here, and many of the people who are involved in the food bank and the trustees have come from that background as well. And so that's a very different group of people than maybe a middle class sort of town somewhere with middle class trustee, or people who have never experienced any poverty in their life leading a food bank as well. And so I suppose for every food bank it will feel different in terms of threatening level of change and or just more natural and organic, and is already sort of happening as well. So it'll be interesting to see across the network how different food banks react to doing that.
Yeah,
be interesting.
I mean, at Trussell, at sort of national level, so Trussell sort of historically didn't really do much in terms of participation, and we'll hold up our hands to that. But we've had a Together for Change panel of people with lived experience, and they very much the senior leadership team met with them monthly, and very much consulted sort of on the strategy. And they developed a resource around how to make, I can't remember, it's a very long title, but how to make financial inclusion projects effective. That's not the title. It's much longer, much catchier. But actually, so if you're going to create a financial inclusion service, what do you need to think about? And this is our perspective as people with lived experience of having used services. So that's an example of how how participation can be really key in terms of really engaging people, gathering wisdom and expertise. But actually, it was 2 or 3 members of the panel who actually put that resource together. So it's about being prepared to also give that power over. And, what an amazing resource it is, because it gives such valuable insights in terms of what works and what you need to think about if you are going to run a financial inclusion service.
So with that, then you've got many food banks doing lots of different things, and you aren't in charge, overseeing like a manager in a business sense of any given food bank. You don't direct the vision or direction of what people do. You encourage and resource. But looking forward, for you personally, what would be your aspirations for food banks in your region? Even for us, but other people as well, of different projects and initiatives for that ambitious goal of ending the need for food bank. What would you like to see if it was, if you could force everyone to do everything you wanted to do? What would be at the top of your list? Because everyone's different. We talk to what they prioritise that they think is the most important thing.
Yeah, I think it very much needs to be owned by each individual food bank, and maybe that's a bit of a cop out. But I would love to see. Wouldn't it be amazing if in Norfolk and Suffolk we didn't need food banks?
First.
Make it competitive.
Yeah.
But
I like it. I like that. I love it. We have a good game.
I think, that's just so difficult, because I never want to force anything on food banks. It's not about that. It's about me encouraging and facilitating what food banks want to do and inspiring them and resourcing them. So
I think that answer is fine, Jo, because what it shows is that you have a balanced view of the huge complexity of the task that's before us, because there's 20 different things that need to happen all at the same time, and they're all important. And if any of them aren't aligned, then it won't work. We might head towards that. And there might be some big pieces of the pie, but everything needs to happen all at once, which is why there's so many things that are going on. And so I think that's actually the right answer, is we don't know, because it's everything. Yeah. Everything's important. And that sounds like a cop-out, but it's we were talking before, with the even if we got an uplift in universal credit and people had more money and it was enough to meet the essentials, I think that would only take 20% hit out of the number of people we feed. It's all the other things around that as well that need to be happening at the same time. And so I don't think it's not a one silver bullet thing, is it? So,
and it's food banks prioritising for them. So when we when I did these Together for Change meetings with food banks when our strategy was sort of launched, and we had changing communities, changing minds and changing policy. And, it was very clear some food banks were very keen on the changing communities. So what can we put in place to support people coming to the food bank? Other food banks were really passionate around, no, it's about changing policy and we really want to focus on this area. So I think it's about just really supporting, where food banks sort of see the need that's important in their community and supporting that. And I don't think you can do everything. I think it's about, and that's why working with people with lived experience is so important, because that will sort of help prioritise, and actually that's really key in all areas of your food bank sort of operation.
So lastly, anything else that you want to share or talk about, or anything that with our viewers that you want to, and you don't have to, because we ask the same question at the end every time, that something that comes from you rather than from me. Anything you want to talk about?
Just to flag, we have a campaign at the moment, Guarantee Our Essentials campaign, which we're doing jointly with the Joseph Rowntree Foundation. So that fits into changing policy. And, as much as it's important for food banks to sort of do things at a local level, at the end of the day, we know that there are issues with our benefit system, which is driving people to food banks. So the campaign is around ensuring the rate of universal credit is increased so people can afford their essentials. And at the moment, it is falling short. So, we have an action for you to email your local MP. So probably the best place is to go on the Trussell Trust website, and I can't remember how you find it, but what we do, research advocacy, can't remember, but look up Guarantee Our Essentials campaign or just Google it, and do please email your local MP, because the more people we get emailing their MP, the more likely, that we're going to sort of get traction on it. We're basically asking for an uplift in universal credit, an independent body to set the amount that it should be, because at the moment it's arbitrary in terms of the amount people get, and it's not enough, and for that to be enshrined in legislation. So if there's a change in party, it won't change. So that is really, really key to increasing the amount of money people have in their pockets.
Cool, that's a good place to stop.
Brilliant.
Thank you for coming in, Jo. We appreciate it.
My pleasure.
And we'll do a bit to camera now. So it is just in 2 weeks' time, we're going to change gears. We're going to switch to some Hublife shows.
Oh, yes.
And we're going to have some guests with us, I think, next time.
I think you're right.
See you then.
If you like this episode, then why not click on another Hublife show over here? Or if you fancy something a little bit more serious, then check out an episode of the Hublife Podcast over here.